Today we're going to be painting daffodils. It's day 5 and so far yellow is on the menu. So if you are ready and you've got your yellows, one tip I have for you is to make sure that you've got your warm and your cool yellows. Pull them out and let's get started. Hi, my name is Jillian. I'm a full-time watercolor artist who quit her job doing psychology to show you how to embrace the mess and magic of watercolor. Here's a look at all the materials that I'll be using. If you want more information, you can find the list of these materials in the description below. Welcome to today's video. We are going to be painting the daffodils. I'm really excited because these flowers are so pretty, and at the same time I felt like they could be quite intimidating just because the whole thing is yellow in color. Now I'm using my 1/2 inch flat brush from Princeton Velvet Touch, and we are just starting off by mapping out the shape of the flower. So what I like to do is I like to use my brush to kind of map out the outside shape of the flower, and then following which I start to navigate where exactly that center is. At this point in time, you want to start to play around with the color value. So I started with a really light wash, a really light value of lemon yellow, and then I slowly increased the color value as I went along. Now the centers are pretty dark in color value, and this is where I used a lot more paint is to water ratio on my brush. So this is something that you want to keep in mind and take note of so that you can navigate getting darker color values versus lighter color values, especially when you're painting in one color. Now I added a tad of vermilion hue to my lemon yellow, so this gives me a slight orange kind of shade, and I am basically mapping out that center. And because I want that center to stand out, I've actually created some lines and some shadows just to navigate where exactly those stems start to peek out. One thing I notice about the way in which I paint flowers is that I love to paint from the outside in. And what I mean by that is that I basically pull my petals from the outside and go inwards towards the center of the flower. Now, all of us have got different ways in which we navigate painting flowers, and there's no real right or wrong way of doing it. I find that this is the system or style that I like painting my flowers in. Now, I'm also currently adding in some shadows where I've started to define where I can see the dark areas in the reference photo. So pay attention to where the colors are darker, and I added in a tad bit of orange so that there's a bit of a glow in between those areas. I'm working on my 3rd flower, so I thought that it would be fun for me to separate and spread out the flowers this time. The last time when we were painting red, I had put all of the spray carnations on one side, and then I had put the tulips on another side. Now I felt like separating the flowers a bit can kind of change up the composition. So you can see that I've added a 3rd flower there just below the sunflowers. Now I have added in a little bit of sap green to my yellow, and this is where I get a yellowish greenish hue, and I felt like that color acted really well as the shadows. And that's also because if you look at the colors in the reference photo, you can see that the yellow that is present is a bit more of a greenish yellow as compared to orangey reddish kind of yellow. And you can see that the yellow between the sunflower and the daffodil is quite different. So ask yourself what kind of yellows you own in your palette, because I think that's going to help you to decide whether or not to use a cool yellow or a warm yellow in your painting. Hey, interrupting your feed just to check in. Make sure you're holding your brush lightly, and also while we're getting into the details, don't forget to breathe. I often work in layers, so this means that I would wait for my painting to fully dry and then I would go in and add layers. Most of the time when I add layers, it's usually a light wash of the same color, and because watercolor is transparent, you actually get to layer and glaze upon that previous layer. So you can see that even as I'm adding shadows on the daffodil, it is a very light wash. In fact, the consistency is so thin so that you get a really nice light color instead of a very dark contrasting color. And I wanted some gentle folds because if you look at the reference photo, you can see that the shadows are what differentiates each petal. And the nice thing about the daffodil is that there isn't really very many petals to differentiate. So really what you want to do is just take a look at the reference photo and decide which petal is going to be in the front and which is going to be at the back. And then you start to add lines to differentiate some of them. Now I love that by adding in that orange hue into the top of the stamens or the top of the flower, I felt like the whole thing stood out, and in fact it also complemented the sunflower very well. So I have to keep in mind the other flowers and the colors that I've used throughout the painting so that everything is more cohesive. Even though they are different flowers, it's important to still use the same colors throughout the painting so that the viewer doesn't feel like all the objects in the painting are separate. The secret to painting shadows is really to ask yourself where the light source is, because shadows are casted where there is light. So ask yourself where exactly is the light hitting on the flower as you're looking at the reference photo, and from there you'll be able to identify where should be your brightest, lightest colors versus your darker, cooler colors. The stems on these daffodils are pretty thick, so I'm adding them in with a nice kind of yellowish green color. I love that some of the stems are hiding behind that sunflower, so I have to really carefully navigate the parts where it hits in between the petals. At the same time, because watercolor is transparent, you really want to be careful to not have too much of an overlap with your green on your yellow, because you can actually see that overlap. So use a small round brush if that helps you to navigate better. I want you to pay attention to the stem if I had just left it in one layer versus me now going in and adding in some slight bits of shadow. You can see that the stem stands out a lot more just because I've added a small layer of darker color value, and this is optional of course, but I think that for me, in the style that I love painting, I find that it helps to bring out more depth to my painting. I'm going to be honest, I feel like this third daffodil here is not as lively as the other two that I've painted, and I'm fussing with the center, trying to make it look more defined and pop. I suppose because the centers are flatter, or you get this round circle there, it kind of feels like the entire thing is flat. So I'm attempting to actually use orange to elevate some of that and create a darker value of orange, hoping that that actually helps me to bring out the centers of that third flower a bit more. When you see me go to my flower and adding details, this is probably when my painting has fully dry. So you can tell the difference of when I'm doing it, whether my paper is dry or not, if you see whether my paints are moving. If my paints are staying where they are and there's no movement, then most likely my paper is dry, because with watercolor we know that once there is water on the surface, your paints are going to move. And I like to work in these wet and dry layers where I'm slowly just adding in more and more depth to differentiate the petals from that stamen that you see. I don't know about you, but so far the daffodils have to be my favorite flower to paint across all the flowers that we have done so far. And what I really liked about it was having to mix in some of that cool and that warm color together, and it comes together so beautifully. I want to take a look at your art, so I would love to connect with you on social media. All the channels that you can connect with me are down in the description below. And if you've got any comments, feedback about today's tutorial, feel free to drop them in the comment box so that I can understand how this experience was like for you as you were painting with me. I cannot wait for us to paint again together next time.